And I'm going to kind of summarize a little bit what John Brandenburg talked about and try to make it bring it back to the South Platte to make it relevant to our areas based on what I've seen and experienced and spoken with a number of you about. And then we'll get to the Wetland Scorecard, which will really bring in your participation, and we can have some discussions at that point. I hesitate to give like a slide of recommendations. I don't want you to have the perception that there's a cookie-cutter approach to managing our wetlands. Everybody's situation is different, and if we want a variety of wetland types out there, we don't want to have the same approach for all of our wetlands out there. But a lot of people do ask me for, what is the, what is the proper timing? What's the proper rate for managing our wetlands? And along the South Platte, we have a lot of late successional stuff. We have a lot of areas that don't have the ability to, to get spring water and do drawdowns. So there is an ideal state that we can have, just because there's not a whole lot of this available. And the recommendation that came up with is to try to do drawdowns between April 15th to June 30th, and preferably in the earlier half. And I say that because what you want to try to avoid is somewhere in early to mid-June you start getting the cotton flying out of the cottonwood trees. And that has a very similar germination regime to more soil plants. And you don't want to get your seasonal wetlands filled with woody plants like cottonwoods. So if you can get your drawdowns done by the end of May, a lot of times you'll avoid those cottonwood taking over some of your wetland areas. Second, try to do slow drawdowns over the course of about 2 to 3 weeks. Now you can do drawdowns in about 3 days in some cases, and you will get really good responses. And you can do them for over a month period of time. If you tend to do drawdowns for over too long of a period, you'll start to convert that area into a perennial wetland. You might get more sedges or spike rushes at first, or they might turn into cattail areas later. So if you have water as the season gets warmer, you will be encouraging some of those perennials. So I don't necessarily encourage extremely long drawdowns or extremely short drawdowns. Somewhere in between is more ideal. If you have the ability to do summer flash irrigations, that can have a profound improvement on annual production. Disking or tilling every 3 years, again, that just goes back to the idea of wetland succession, trying to keep the areas so you can get bare dirt and mud, and you'll get really good annual plant production for those 2 or 3 years, and again, they'll start turning into more perennial systems after that. Mowing 50-90% of the wetland basin in late August. If you have a lot of plants that have very persistent stems, like curly dock or smartweeds, those won't fall down on their own as easily as the winter goes on. If you have a lot of grasses, you might not need to mow at all, because they will fall down on their own throughout the season. But just to maintain some open water, especially some species like widgeon and pintails do like that more open landscape. And they get too shy. They won't go into the thicker growth like mallards will. So, more open areas for some of those species like to encourage pintails, green winged teal, and slow flood-ups in the fall. And that is most important if you have deeper wetlands. If they're over about 12 or 18 inches, the ducks can't get there. The dabbling ducks can't tip down deep enough to take advantage of those seeds if it gets much deeper than, I would say, even 4 to 6 inches for teal, or 12 to 18 inches for a mallard. So if you do a slow flood up, you'll let the waterfowl utilize the resources in those deeper areas prior to getting too deep. And you get the most utilization out of the production that you get. So if I had to make recommendations, these would fit in there. Brian?
Just before you leave this slide, Colin, how often do you recommend the summer flash irrigation where it's possible?
And that's again if you're not getting good rains, but in July, you might find if some of your plants might start drying up if you haven't gotten good monsoon rains. But a single irrigation.
Just a single?
Yeah, that usually gives it a good boost. So it's an example of improved utilization you can get through slow flood ups. Those ducks will just feed right along the edge of the water line. As water comes up, they'll just be pushing along there, and you get maximum use out of that seed value that's on the ground as the water comes up each day. If you can expose 10 feet of ground, they'll keep coming to your well, and they'll extend the amount of time that waterfowl will use that impoundment. And you might not have this ability. This is for Bosqueville Apache and the flood-up schedule. But if you have multiple wetlands, you need to see these green lines are different wetlands. And if you can flood them, this unit's called 28. You can flood it over a period of looks like a week. It's a smaller unit. Then get another one going, and throughout the whole fall season, you can keep attracting ducks to your property, and you can keep feeding waterfowl throughout the season if you do staged flood ups. So it's a way to increase the amount of time that you're providing food. Now, I know a lot of you get water, and when water's available, you got to take it. And so if that's the case, then getting water out there is first and foremost the important thing to do. But if you have the ability to do staged flood ups, that's one way to increase the amount of time that you're bringing ducks to your property and getting maximum utilization out of your food values. So I know a lot of you can't do the ideal moist soil management and all the techniques that we were discussing, that John was discussing. So I encourage you to try to pick techniques that will work for you, that you can do. This slide gives an idea from a research study in California, looking at the relative contributions of different activities will have on seed production. For instance, summer irrigations probably has the biggest effect on improving seed values. If you can do summer irrigations, you basically, in their study, they doubled their seed production. Probably the second biggest improvement they can do is by disking. They had low intensity disking versus medium and high intensity disking. And the deeper and more you can disturb it, the more seeds that you'll produce. So if you have to choose one thing to do, and that's all you can do, you're improving your wetland there. Drawdown rate. If you have an extremely slow drawdown, such as through evaporation, or you can pull boards very slowly, rather than pulling all your boards at once, you'll improve your seed production. And drawdown date. This hasn't been established in the South Platte very rigorously. In this California study, they found the highest production by having mid-season drawdowns. And other studies have higher production if they have early season drawdowns. And that early, mid, and late, I would say in the South Platte, things dry up so fast that we don't have 3 seasons. We have an early and we have a late. If you wait, if to June or July to get water out there, in a lot of cases, the soil is so sandy and the evaporation is so high that you might not get a good germination rate. So I would encourage drawing down, in the late April and throughout the May period. And I mentioned trying to focus on incremental improvements. I guess this kind of reiterates what I had shown in the previous slide. Disking or tilling, if that's all you do, you can get 250% to 600% increase in waterfowl food production. If you can't do some irrigation, you can double your food production. Cocklebur management, or sticking back woody plants like willows or cottonwoods. Some of the research has shown that you can get 420 pound per acre increase just through doing that. And another study I found in Texas Platte, all they did was mowing. They had similar water management. similar age of wetlands since disturbance. And actually found a higher waterfowl abuse with a 50-50 ratio of cover and open water than they had with 25-75 or 75% cover to 25% cover. And some of that standing vegetation makes a really good substrate for invertebrates to grow in. And so it's a combination of lane and it also provides cover for winds during the winter, a place for them to kind of hide out and escape the elements. So, balancing the amount of cover that you have out there can have effects on the types and the amount of waterfowl that you attract. So again, if that's all you can do, consider playing around with different versions of how much you mow or leave standing. And this slide shows seasonal wetland drawdowns, also staggered throughout the season. There are early or later drawdowns that you can do. If you have the ability to do drawdowns at different times of the spring, you'll get different suites of plants that come up which provide different nutrients to waterfowl. We have a variety of waterfowl foods out there. If you've just gone and dished the wetlands, you will probably want to focus on early drawdowns for the first 2 or 3 years. Disking the wetlands gives you that bare ground. You're back at the early seral stage. If you have a later season drawdown, you'll convert that area to a perennial system faster. You'll get rushes and cattails growing out there, and you don't want to do that the year after that you disc. You want to take advantage. You spent the money and the diesel disking it the previous year, so you want to keep it in the annual status, for at least 2 or 3 years. When it starts growing, if it starts producing spike rushes and sedges, then you can do the later season drawdowns there because it's already in that state. So Brian showed this slide already. I won't spend too much time on it. On average, there was about 300 pounds per acre produced in this pilot study on state wildlife areas. And in the South Platte, we've estimated there's approximately 1,300 acres of moist soil units. I mean, these include recharge ponds and also dedicated moist soil units. WRPs have about 600 acres based on some inventories that I've done, and there's approximately 1,000 acres on state wildlife areas based on some information that you've actually provided and Brian. I would actually like to get better estimates of what we have out there. I don't think it's been officially mapped what we have and don't have out there. So what is it? What can we do on these 1,300 acres? With low, medium, or high intensity management. On this previous slide, it shows that we're all from summer pounds shows 16 pounds per acre all the way to 800 pounds per acre, and that's at various levels of intensity, various water regimes. And if let's say we're somewhere around 300 pounds per acre, we can get that up to if we're around 200 pounds per acre, based on the energetic requirements of waterfowl. That would feed about 7,000 ducks on those 1,300 acres for the fall season. I calculated that for September through November. And that was only if we have just those 1,300 acres. If we double from 200 to 400, we can bring our number of ducks that we can feed up to about 17,000 ducks. That's how much food we have for that many ducks for those 90 days. And the point of this is that if you can, if your wetland is around 50 pounds per acre, if you can do something to double it, you can increase the number of waterfowl that you can maintain in that area. And along South Platte, if we can all increase our, incrementally increase the quality of our wetland areas, we can approach larger number of ducks that we can meet their energetic needs on our limited acreage. Now there's other wetlands beside these 1,300 acres that are around the South Platte. So we do maintain more ducks than that, but it's just an example. This table is in your wetland scorecard sheet, and it's kind of a reference that brings together a lot of what we talked about. The length of time you have water out there is your hydro period. If you have short hydro period, if it's too short, you're not going to get a whole lot of good vegetation growing in your wetlands. If you have too long of a hydro period, if you have water out there all year long, it's going to favor cattails and other perennial plants. So, in general, a medium hydro period is best. With some seasonal drying and seasonal wetting. Drawdown dates before April 15th, it's a little too early for the growing season in general. After June 15th, again, you start encouraging cattails and perennials. So in the middle there is what you might want to aim for. And drawdown duration, a slow to medium rate is what is most ideal in a lot of cases. You can do drawdowns, like I said, in less than a week, and especially if you're doing it kind of the earlier mid-season, you can get away with a quick drawdown. It's not as hot. If you're doing a 3-day drawdown in June, things will probably dry up too fast. To try to do that then, but you might be able to get away with a 3-day drawdown in late April, early May, just because it is cooler. You can do drawdowns that are longer a month if you start them early enough. But you probably don't want to do that later in the season because it will encourage cattails again. So you can also use this as kind of a troubleshooting. If you're having problems with the cattails, you can try to increase your drawdown duration, or you can try to move your drawdown to an earlier period if you have that choice. Hydrological connectivity refers to the depth to groundwater. If an area tends to stay wet for a long period of time, you'll encourage cattails. But also in those situations, you can get away with faster drawdowns. If you have a short drawdown period, it'll probably work out better if you have shallow groundwater there than if you have deep groundwater. Time-sensitive service. The year that you do disturbance, you'll have no plants out there. You're probably basically starting from scratch. If you get longer than 4 years, it's getting to be pretty old. Start decadent growth in the wetlands. Other considerations are with the soil, the salinity, and how much clay content you have. And you don't have a lot of control over that in a lot of cases. So I'll speak a little bit about cattails. That's one of the common issues that I hear about in South Platte. It's either we have too much water or not enough water, it seems. Cattails have large root reserves, and the root growth is most rapid after the seed heads form. So throughout the earlier in the spring, they're putting a lot of the resources into growing these reproductive organs on them. And after that, their energy is going to building more roots. And so a great time to try to treat these either mechanically through mowing and grazing or burning or herbicide is after the seed heads have fully formed, but they're still green. So there's two kinds of seed heads in cattails, a stem head and distillate head. And they'll both be green, but fully formed. And that's when they seem to be most vulnerable. And cattails especially require repeated disturbance or drying or treatments because they do have a lot of starches in their roots. And you need it to, when you disturb it, it'll have a flourish of growth. And each time it has a flourish of growth, it's using up more of its root reserves. And it's only through time that you're going to stress it enough that you might actually set it back and kill it. Calciber. John talked about how we take care of that at Bosquedale Apache, and we were able to mow Calciber while the desired plants are still lower than the tops of the Calciber, and flood I guess for 3 days is what we tried to do. 3 days. Right, 3 days rather than 24 hours. I already forgot how that works. Well, I know a lot of us don't have that option. What I'd like to see if we could accomplish here is using some kind of wicker or herbicide or carpet roller herbicide applicator. And I haven't seen this done or read about it anywhere, but it might be a way to apply herbicide to cockleburr while other plants are lower. And if you haven't worked with a wicker roller, the herbicide goes through these ropes on a bar that you can set to various heights. And so the plants that are that height or higher will get herbicide on them and get treated, but it doesn't put herbicide on the plants that are lower than that. So I'd be curious if anyone is able to do this. Do even just a few strips through a wetland that has a lot of cockleburr. There's a period in, I would say, late June when cockleburr might be about 18 inches high, whereas your smartweeds and grasses might be, 6 inches high. And then you can set your roller bar at around 12 inches to treat the cockleburr. So if anyone's is willing to experiment with this, I'd love to see how this could work. So this shows an example of cockleburr has a real rapid growth, whereas your grasses will stay under that. You can either mow or treat the cockleburr at that stage. You can often, I think you can be able to release the plants that are under the canopy. A lot of questions I get are about muskrat and beaver control. A lot of what you can do is try to prevent problems through wetland design. They recommend deck construction of 12 feet tops at minimum with a 6-to-1 side slope. Keep borrow areas further away from the dike to minimize the amount of burrowing damage. And what that wide berm does is, what they're trying to do is the muskrats and beavers trying to burrow into the bank and then up to a point where they're out at the high water level. So if you make them burrow further, they're less likely to construct their burrows in your banks. Here's an example of one of the large wide berms. Beaver deceivers are one way to discourage plugging up of your infrastructure. And I use the word discourage because it almost seems like a matter of time before they do get this plugged up. But we've had some success with that. And another design is to try to dig out a basin below the outflow structure. And what that does, again, is delaying them. They have to fill all this with material before they can fill the pipe ends. So it just makes it more difficult for them to plug your infrastructure. Any questions with that so far? We're going to have a little less time than I thought to work on this, but this was you should have a sheet that's called the Seasonal Wetland Scorecard. And I designed this to help you think about all the different techniques and activities we heard about this morning, to put it in the context of your own wetland. So what I'd like you to do is think about one of your wetland basins, either one of your troublesome ones or even one of your good ones. And the first step is to draw the hydrograph. And then this hydrograph is probably 90% of what's important with this sheet. And I'll go through an example here. It might be, we'll call it more soil pond number 1. And if you're lucky, you can have a hydrograph that's wet winter long, and you can do spring drawdowns and have it dry during the summer, and then wet again in the fall and winter. And so that's an example of one of the hydrographs. It's 100% filled or down to 0. You can also, it's good to draw in your management activities or other conditions along the hydrograph. It might be frozen during the winter. In this case, you might be able to do a 4-week drawdown Again, any before June, before the cotton starts flying. If turning towards the end of fall, after the plant's matured, you can schedule your mowing there. So it's a good way to visually see what you have to do in that wetland. Shows you a good way to schedule your activities. Another example, in this case, it might be time to, it hasn't been disturbed in a while, and so you can do your drawdowns as normal, and this might be the year that you need to treat your weeds and do some fall disking, and then that'll set the stage for your early succession drawdown next spring. In this case, if you have a wetland with a lot of cattails in it, consider doing a long drawdown, because you're not drawing down for, in this case, you're not drawing down for an annual plant production. But use this year to really hit the cattails hard, and you might even fallow it for the rest of the year, and that'll really stress out that area, especially in a drought year if you're not expecting to get water that year. If you have the ability to dry it up, keep it dry. And so I have a feeling a lot of your wetlands might look more like this. When you have water, you take it. You may get it, may or may not get it in the spring. You can do your disking treatments prior to a spring flood if you get it. So those are different examples of hydrographs that you might be able to draw for your property. So, this is another example of some wetlands you're not able to draw down entirely. They're too wet in some cases. But if you can do a partial drawdown, just to expose maybe the 10 or 20 feet of pond edge, you can get moisture response along that pond edge. So you can draw down as much as you can, and then slowly fill it in the fall. And so the way the scorecard is made to go is there's different scoring criteria and management activities that you can do, and to go ahead and you can read the different options. For flooding frequency, are you able to flood it each year, or only 2 out of 3 years, or 1 out of 3 years, less than that, or not at all. You can give yourself a score from 0 to 1. And in this example, it floods every year. It's not really under your control of the landowner. These gray boxes show potential things you consider to try to improve that criteria. And it'll give you recommendations about what to think about, what you can do, and you can score yourself. In this case, it's not much we can do, but it stays a score after score 1 after. So you can read the different options. You can, if you're in this case, your drawdown rate. Let's say in our particular wetland, I have been doing slow drawdowns. The area just quickly dries. I pull all the boards and it dries up in less than 3 days. Well, perhaps I do have the ability to control that. I can manage the outflows and manage the inflows. So in some cases, if you might be getting a lot of water that comes through your system. You don't have good outflow infrastructure. You can manage it through managing the inflows by slowly reducing the amount of water coming in. We'll still reduce them. We'll still lower the water levels. Let's see. So that was spring flooding. There's some scoring variables for vegetation. How much persistent vegetation do you have out there? 0 to 50%, 50 to 75, or over 75%. In this scenario, that we have a lot of cover of these undesirable plants like cattails. So one thing you might be able to try to do is include disturbance that will raise the score from 0.3 to 1. Now this might need some explanation here. And it's based on, came up with this way to rate your plant value in a wetland basin and give it a score. So it's based on the amount of cover of various plant species, the food value of those plants that are out there, and whether they have good or average or poor production during that year. And so on the last page of your scorecard is the list of plants, and these values are 1 through 10. It's rated for invertebrates overall value, and it's based on professional judgment by some professionals and wetland managers. So here's an example of maybe how to look at your wetland basin and score it. You kind of see, I saw a few distinct areas in this wetland basin. Over here we have a lot of 3 square. It covers about 25% of the wetland basin. 3 square is a food value of 6 based on the last page of your the scorecard. And 25% of value 6 plant would get 0.3 points. We have an area that has a combination of foxtail barley and smart wheat. Foxtail barley is a food value 4, smart wheat is a food value 8. You can kind of average those. So I gave it a score of 0.3. And in the back, majority of that back there, as you get further away, is this large area of spikegrass. Spikegrass is a food value of 4 according to that list. Covers 50% of the wetland basin, and so a total of 0.4 points. And so in this case, we get a total score of 1.0 for our wetland basin. It's not all smart wheat. It's not all barnyard grass. It's a mix of plants, but it still comes out to having a high food value. Okay, and we've seen this table. It's more of a reference to think about what your management is currently. And if you're having troubles not producing good enough vegetation, or have producing too many perennials, it lets you use an idea of maybe what you can do. Do things earlier, slower drawdowns, faster drawdowns. And then finally, the fall and winter flooding. This is for managing the flood ups for wintering waterfowl when they're returning, like the migratory waterfowl when they're returning. And it does flooding frequency, flooding extent, flooding duration, flooding depth. And then also salinity. Salinity can affect the plants that grow in the basin, especially if you have high transpiration rates and you're leaving water out there. And so doing drawdowns earlier will help address salt issues because you have less evapotranspiration. Again, shorter drawdowns also reduces that chance of too much evaporation. If you get a chance to flood your areas, and as you're doing your drawdowns, pull the last boards. It'll also help flush some of those salts out as well. So here's an example of some salt buildup on the edge of a wetland basin. So if you, in our example here, we scored up all the numbers in the boxes and had a 6.0. And with some management, we thought we can get it to a score of 8.6. Now, there's a total potential score of 10, but I wouldn't focus on that too much. You want to focus on an incremental improvement. If you can improve this from 6 to 7 even, you are having an improvement there. So there's no need to focus on trying to get or berate yourself for not having a 10 wetland. It's all about just thinking about ways that might improve your conditions out there, incrementally.